Mhm. Hello and welcome to the Digital Discourses, the platform economy, the future of work. I'm your moderator, Amelinda Panukusmaningtias from the Center for Digital Society, Universitas Gadjah Mada, Indonesia. I am also part of the Fair Work Project Indonesian team. Thank you for taking the time to join us today as we talk about how the platform economy changed the world of work. Today's event is organized by Goethe-Institut in conjunction with Center for Digital Society and EngageMedia. Digital Discourses is a conference series that focuses on exploring the effects of digital transformation on society, politics, the economy, and the environment. The next edition of Digital Discourses will be held in October 2022 with the theme Science/Fiction, where we will look at the way new technology, which used to be only sci-fi movies, is starting to change our society and our life. So now let's back to today's topic. In recent years, we have witnessed a rapid growth of numerous apps that provide services such as ride-hailing, food delivery, cleaning service, delivery service, design, and many more. These platforms are not only making our life more convenient, but also provide job opportunities for many people. Although the types of gig jobs may not be new, people now have freedom to structure their working lives. It's often dubbed as the platform economy, and it has become a lifeline for people who are otherwise unable to find regular jobs and provides opportunities for many to find side gigs. However, as the platform economy progresses and employs more people, it has become clear that the price of such flexibility and freedom is the absence of security and benefits. Their status as contractors, not as permanent workers, puts them in especially precarious positions since more and more are depending on what were once side jobs as their primary income. With platforms growing in importance, it has become more necessary to understand how does the platform economy affect the future of work and what will working look like in the future. And that is why in today's digital discussion, we have invited researchers in this field to present their findings and their knowledge on the current challenges of the gig economy in their respective countries and to discuss the future of work. But before we start, I would like to share that today's event will be divided into two sessions. After all of the three speakers presenting their insight, finding, and knowledge, we will have a Q&A session. Participants are welcome to ask questions by using the chat feature on the left side of the screen. And for those of you who are joining us on YouTube, you are also welcome to participate in the Q&A session through the live chat feature on YouTube. And if there's any of you from Indonesia who want to participate in the Q&A session, but are not comfortable with your English, feel free to type your questions in Bahasa Indonesia. I'll help to translate it later to our speakers. And at the end of the discussion, 3 participants with the best question will receive a souvenir package from Goethe-Institut. So without further ado, I want to introduce our first speaker, which is Mr. Oz Alyanak, to the spotlight. Nah, Mr. Oz Alyanak is a cultural anthropologist whose research spans labor migration, urban studies, religion, and masculinity. After finishing his PhD from the Washington University in St. Louis in 2019, he moved to Germany as a Volkswagen Stephen postdoctoral fellow. And starting from April 2021, he has taken on a postdoctoral research position at the Fair Work Project, joining a team of scholars to explore working conditions in the platform economy in Germany. He's also a visiting researcher of the Globalization, Work, and Production Research Group at the WZB Berlin Social Science Center. Please welcome Oz Alyanak. Hi, Os. How are you?
Hi, Amel. Thank you. Thanks a lot for the introduction. I'm doing great. I'm actually currently in Turkey right now. It's been about 2 weeks that I came here to visit my family. So what can I say? The sun is out. It's a beautiful day. I'm enjoying it.
Yeah.
And very, very happy to be here. And thanks also to Yvonne for inviting me and to the Goethe-Institut for inviting me to share some of my insights from the Germany research that we've conducted in the last year and a half.
Okay, Os. Then I'll give the floor to you.
All right, thanks a lot. I am going to share my screen, the PowerPoints that I have presented for today, which is on the fair work research that we have been conducting in Germany for the last year and a half, as I mentioned. So for the last year and a half, I've been a postdoctoral researcher located in Berlin, doing the fair work research, which takes place in 30 different countries as we speak today. So I was the country lead for the Germany research, and I was affiliated during my stay in Berlin with the Technical University of Berlin. In about 2 weeks, I'll be moving to the central team in Oxford to join the central team there and continue doing fair work research in Germany, but also in a number of other countries. So I'm looking forward to that as well. So here we go. I'm going to divide this presentation into three, basically. The first part is going to be about fair work and what we do, how we do the research that we do. And then I'm going to move to the Germany side of the story and provide some insights from what we found from the Germany research, and briefly talk about the pledge campaign that we have. And finally, if there is time, but if there is none, please, Q&A session is all for us. We're going to discuss all together if there's a possibility that what we're talking about here is the future of work. And if it is, then what awaits us in the future of work. So here we go, fair work, brief overview. So platform economy, as Amel has already done the introduction, is a kind of new phenomenon. It's been going on for actually quite some time, but it's becoming more and more prominent all over the world in the last 5 to 10 years. In Germany, definitely in the last 5 years or so, we've seen so many new platforms, digital labor platforms that came into the market, and a lot of workers also choosing these platforms to find employment. So the way that we define a digital labor platform is basically a company that uses digital resources, so interfaces, web pages, etc., to mediate value-creating interactions between the consumers and the individual service providers, the workers themselves. So there's the workers and the consumers, and there's the platform that mediates that relationship. That, to us, is the definition of a platform. And the platform economy itself is basically a market, in a sense, that provides a short-term supply and demand for labor. And the work itself can be contractual, but it can also be out of a contract, can be free on a freelancing basis, for example, and is, of course, mediated through a digital platform. And as fair work, what we're trying to do is not just to produce knowledge, but also try to produce change in this economy. So this is an action-oriented research project that locates itself in the midst of different stakeholders. These are the policymakers and the government officials that are seeking jobs in this economy, and the platforms themselves. And the Fair Work Project negotiates with all these different actors and collects data from different actors to do its research. And as I mentioned, we are currently doing this research in 30 different countries. Germany is only one of these countries. And the same research with the same methodology, which I'm going to get into in a second, is done in all of these different countries, including Indonesia, of course. So in terms of our methods, we start with the desk research, which is basically a sort of like know-how with regards to what platforms are funded that we can actually start the research on. And after we get that list and we look at the policies, the labor policies, etc., that are in place in the country context, then we move on to the worker and manager interviews. So basically, with each platform, we try to interview 6 to 10 workers and collect data based on the working conditions, the payment structures, the contracts, etc. And with managers as well, we also try to sit down with them, and many of the managers are sitting down with us to provide additional data with regards to how their platform, the business model itself, functions. And then we put all of this together after many months of research, many months of data collection, And then based on the data that we've collected, we score these platforms out of 10. And the scores are peer reviewed by the country team members, but also 2 additional reviewers from the Fair Work network itself. So basically, we have 5 principles that we evaluate each platform by. These are, the first one is fair pay, so payments. And there are two thresholds under each principle. With fair pay, what we're looking at is that the platform pays at least the local minimum wage, and then for an additional point that it pays a local living wage. Second principle, fair conditions, looks at the conditions at work and whether the workers feel comfortable that there are not risks that they have to endure, that they have to face, confront when working for these platforms. So the first threshold for this principle is that the platform itself takes measures to mitigate task-specific risks. So this could be something like providing bikes or making sure that the bikes are up to date and in good condition to work, providing helmets or providing cleaning materials, or during COVID, providing things like personal protection equipment, etc. And the second point is that it provides a safety net. So things like if the worker is sick, he or she or they still get to get payments, so that sickness does not become a reason for not getting paid. Same with parental leave or holiday leave, etc. The third principle is on contracts, and we basically look at the contracts in consultation with legal scholars and make sure that the contracts are clearly written. First of all, we're talking about Germany. A lot of immigrant workers are in Germany, that they are translated. They're not just in German, but also at least translate into English, but also other languages that these workers may be speaking. And the second point is that the contract does not include any clauses that we feel is gonna harm the worker in the long run. So this could be things like liability clauses, for example. The fourth principle is about management. And here we're basically looking at whether the workers have actual physical channels, human representatives, that they can send emails to, call, or even go to offices and meet in person if they have any questions, problems, concerns that they want to raise individually. So this is the fourth principle. And principle 4.2, basically the second threshold, makes sure that there is equity in the management process, and that all workers have, get to meet the people, the managers that they work for, and they're not discriminated against in doing that. The final principle, and this is something that has become huge in the last year in Germany, and we can talk more about it in question and answer, is fair representation, so collective representation. So we are looking at here the possibility of workers as a group of workers, not as individuals, to be able to organize. So, as an individual, when you go confront a big platform, your chances of getting, your word out there, getting your voice heard might be smaller, but as a group of workers, the chances are higher. So here we're looking at basically possibilities to, for example, in the case of Germany, form works councils, or possibilities to get union representation. If the platform is providing those mechanisms, is open to these kinds of methods and mechanisms of collective worker voice. This is the fifth principle that we're looking at. At the end of the 5 principles, basically, as I mentioned, we have 2 different thresholds. We assign points based on the data that we collected, principle by principle. So 1 point for the first point, the first threshold, and second point for the second threshold in each principle, which reaches us to a score of 10. And 10 here, I have to underline over and over again, does not mean that this is the perfect platform. It just means that it's meeting the minimum standards of fairness in this economy. Even a 10 out of 10 platform, which we never had in the two and a half years of fair work research in any of the countries that we've done the research so far, even a 10 out of 10 platform has a lot of things to still do to make work fair and enjoyable for the workers. So let's get to the Fair Work Germany part without prolonging the process of talking about fair work as a project. So we know in Germany, the platform economy has become quite big in the last 5 years or so. There are a number of studies, and statistics can fail in this regard because a lot of workers do not consider the work that they do as platform work sometimes, or are not included in these numbers, or are freelancing and are not necessarily declaring or are known by statistical offices of the jobs that they do. But fairly speaking, we know that 2.5 to 3 million workers in Germany earn at least a quarter of their income through platform work. So as Amel has mentioned, this includes things like ride hailing. So Uber, FreeNow, etc., or different platforms that operate in different countries for ride hailing purposes. This includes platforms that offer domestic work or care work, for example. This also includes heavily, especially in Germany in the last many years, delivery, food and grocery delivery platforms. And Berlin, especially in Germany, but also in Europe, has become one of the centers of venture capital investments. So a lot of new companies are that operate all over Europe right now are actually based in Berlin. They have headquarters in Berlin, physical offices in Berlin. So that was also one of the reasons that we want to focus the research a bit more on Berlin. We also included participants from other cities around Germany, but our focus, and I was physically also present in Berlin for the most part. So our focus was also in Berlin, on Berlin. And finally, as I mentioned, there have been, especially right during COVID, and I mean, COVID still continues, but when the pandemic was really led us into lockdowns, for example, in Germany and the rest of the world, a lot of new players got in the market of delivering food and groceries. So that also was a new phenomenon. There was 2 platforms before, and all of a sudden we had like 6 platforms that are operating in the food and grocery delivery sector in Germany itself. And having just laid the background of what German platform economy looks like, let me just like fast forward a little and then just tell you what the key findings are from the research that we have done. And then I'm going to break these down into the principles that I mentioned before, so that we get a clear understanding of how, which principles work and which principles don't in the case of Germany. So in the case of Germany, the platform economy, especially in 2019 and 20, and a little bit into 2021 as well, we've seen increased competition for workers. A lot of these platforms were interested in employing a lot more workers, and they were also getting a lot of investment money. They were growing exponentially. But this did not necessarily translate into better labor standards or fair labor standards. This did not mean that workers were getting paid more in some cases, or were provided with equipment and other task-specific things that they would need for work, for example. And secondly, we see that the working conditions depends on the platforms. So some platforms, as we know, are going to score higher, and some platforms are going to score lower because of how they treat their workers, what they offer to their workers. And in some cases, the working conditions, even within the platform, differ from one warehouse to another warehouse, or one building to other building, basically in this case. And these are all things that we took into credit in coming up with our scores, of course. And there were some platforms that, compared to last year, this was the second year of Germany research. The first year was done in 2019. I wasn't part of the Fair Work team back then. We know that some some platforms are adopting policies, for example, with regards to collective representation, with regards to anti-discrimination policies, some also with regards to regulation of working conditions, are implementing fair policies, but there's still a lot more to be done. And finally, and this is the big one, this has been the theme of pretty much like all of my stay in Berlin, because I've seen so many strikes, so many worker organized events, so many wildcat strikes, as they're called, because they're not covered legally, protected legally within the German legal system. We've seen so much worker activism, and we've seen platforms respond to that worker activism. We've seen a lot of many of these platforms, workers organizing and forming works councils, for example, Betriebsrat, as they're known in German. So worker activism did matter, not just for changing policies in the platforms, but also for the politicians to open their eyes and realize there's something happening here, for the media to also open their eyes and realize that there's something happening here, and also for us researchers as well to benefit from, because that also brings us with a plethora of data, basically, and also a lot of opportunities to meet workers in person and to talk to them and have a more intimate understanding of what is really going on in the platform economy. So the findings, as I said, I'm going to break it down in principle by principle very quickly. So with regards to fair payments, when we were doing research, the minimum hourly wage was €9.60 an hour. After cost, that's really important to us because we know that a lot of platforms actually don't provide certain things to their workers, and those things come out of the workers' pocket. So we want to make sure that these platforms provide at least $9.60 an hour after the costs. And most of the platforms in Germany did get this point, and they did provide $9.60 an hour. But with regards to local living wage, which we calculated as $12.50, if I'm not mistaken, I don't have the exact number in front of me right now. We did a calculation based on some statistical office numbers, government numbers, and only 2 platforms, 12 that we've evaluated, actually gave a local living wage to their workers after costs. With regards to fair conditions, this was very problematic. Many platform workers do actually work in precarious conditions. So that was a big problem, and a lot of platforms did not get the points for that. And many of the platforms also do not audit or are not audited regularly to ensure that the workers are working in a safe environment. And finally, if you're a contractual, if you're in an employment contract in Germany, this comes as a given, but we also know a lot of platforms do not offer employment contracts to their workers. So many of the workers do work as independent contractors or freelancers, and they do not get any of the benefits that a worker in an employment contract gets. And that was quite problematic, especially during COVID, when sickness was an everyday reality in our lives. With regards to fair contracts, many of the contracts we found did abide with the local law, with the German law, national federal law as well. And they were comprehensive and usually provided in German and English. In some platforms also, if they're employing a lot of, let's say, Spanish workers or Spanish workers coming from Spanish-speaking countries, there was also a Spanish contract available. Data regulation this is a big thing in Germany. So most of the platforms did comply with this. They were covered under GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulations. But with ride-hailing platforms, this became problematic because ride-hailing works on a different system, which includes subcontracting. So you're not directly working for, let's say, Uber, but a subcontracting company. So that was a bit problematic in terms of what contracts workers are provided and if they're regulated by the platform itself. With regards to management, we have found that most platforms have actual physical presence in Germany. So they have human representatives that you can call, you can send emails to. Workers know who they're working for the most cases. But the efficiency of this communication with the platform management is quite questionable, really. Sometimes workers could send, they have the availability, the possibility using their phones, the platform interface, etc., to be able to send questions or concerns or something that happened at work that needs immediate attention. But the response rate was not always great. And in some cases, they did not even get any responses. So that became a problem for certain platforms. And there was many of the platforms do not take anti-discrimination policies seriously. They say that they do, but we don't see it necessarily as much in practice. So there needs to be a lot more to be done in terms of promoting diversity in workplace for many of these platforms. Finally, fair representation. This was a point that pretty much none of the platforms got in Germany, because at the time of research, the majority of the platforms that we've evaluated did not even have works councils, which is a legal right of the workers working for these platforms. Part of that also has to do with the fact that many of the workers are coming from different countries, so the idea of unionizing, organizing, or in what structure, legal structure, was still quite unknown. But and back in 2020-21, we've seen that what it was in earlier stages of development, but there was also, especially in the second half of 2021 into 2022, a lot more of worker activism and a lot of new formations, a lot of new structures such as works councils forming in especially the food and grocery delivery sector. And we can get to what those are and what it was like observing this change in Germany in the local context in situ, basically. So just to give you a fair idea, at the end of the research, after negotiating, after talking with, interviewing workers and management, we basically have these tables that we create that show the points that that the platforms get. So just to give you an example, here are two companies. Gorillas is a food delivery company. Volt is a Gorilla is a grocery delivery company. Volt is a food delivery company. And in the case of Gorillas, maybe you be following the news happening in news in Germany. A lot of media attention has been paid to Gorillas as well. Gorillas only got a 2 out of 10, and those 2 points were for fair pay and fair contracts. So basically, they provided they provided local minimum wage, and they provided a contract that was legible enough for the workers to understand it in 2 different languages. In the case of Volt, Volt got a 7 because they did a better job in monitoring working conditions. They did a better job in communicating with their workers, but they still did not, and to this day, they still do not have a works council, so they did not get any points for Principle 5, for example. So finally, very briefly, because I know I'm running out of time, in like a minute, I'll just wrap this up. We have this pledge campaign that is open to all the institutions, including the Goethe-Institut. So there's an invitation that I'm extending from here as well to Goethe, where we would like to invite institutions to review their policies if they are using these platforms. So this could be cleaning platforms, this could be food or grocery delivery platforms. If you are using one of these platforms, here's an invitation for you to take a look at the pledge, either as a supporter or a partner. And if you feel like you would like to promote better working conditions, and do that by basically bringing in platforms or using platforms that score higher in the Fair Work through Fair Work research, here's an invitation to you, extended to you from me on behalf of Fair Work, to join us as a supporter partner in this campaign. So that's it. That was a very brief overview of the German research that we have done in the last 2 years, and the rest I'm going to save it for question and answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Oz, for your presentation. And moving on, we're going to hear a presentation from Professor Cheryl Ruth Soriano. She is a professor in the Department of Communication de La Salle, University Manila. And she has published numerous works that focus on the intersection of digital cultures, marginality, and social justice. As principal investigator for Fair Work Philippines, her current research explores digital communications and transformations in labor and organizing in the digital economy. She is co-editor of the volume Asian Perspective of Digital Culture, Emerging Phenomena, Enduring Concept, and co-author of Philippine Digital Cultures, Brokerage Dynamics on YouTube, that has been published by Amsterdam University Press. Prof. Soriano held visiting fellowship at the Center for Communications, Politics, and Culture at RMIT University and at the Institute of Sociology and Anthropology in Peking University. Please welcome Cheryl Soriano.
Hi, good day, Amelinda. And terima kasih to Goethe-Institut Indonesia for inviting me today.
Yeah. Please, Cheryl, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Let me just share my screen. All right. Can I just get a check if my audio is all fine? All right. So again, good day, everyone. And following the theme of today's webinar, my talk will highlight the platform labor experience in the Philippines as that between opportunity and precarity. So today I'm speaking in terms of my involvement in research, ethnographic research on Cloudwork, understanding the conditions of Filipino workers in Cloudwork for about 5 years now. And then over the past year in my affiliation with Fair Work as country lead for the Philippine team, I'll also be talking about the experiences of workers in on-demand work. And I'll try to blend the two together in this talk. So my talk will circle around these themes. I first talk about the growing platform economy in the Philippines and also the ambivalent marginality of platform workers in a country in the global south like the Philippines. Then I speak about the labor conditions in both cloud work and on-demand work, highlighting also the research that we've done on fair work. Then I'll circle on what are the assertions of agency that we are seeing from the worker side in terms of articulating solidarity and collective voice, and then end with some concluding thoughts. So it's great that Oz has given us a background of what a platform is. And today I'll talk, as mentioned, I'll talk about two kinds. One is cloud work. I'm not sure if everyone is familiar. Perhaps more of us are familiar with location-based platforms, but cloud work is a kind of a platform where, like Upwork, Fiverr, or onlinejobs.ph, that can match a worker with a client located in another part of the world, usually based in the global north. There's a broad range of work on cloud work that a worker can get, such as from writing to data entry to design work to customer service support to games and software development to digital marketing and even English language teaching to the most popular kind of work among Filipinos, virtual assistants. On the right side of the screen, you'll see the geographically tethered or location-based services where a platform matches a worker and a customer who are located in the same area. And we know this as ride-hailing, food and career, cleaning. In the Philippines, there are sprouting platforms providing cleaning as well. In both cloud work and location-based platforms, workers normally do not possess formal employee and employee relationships. In the platform, they're considered freelancers or gig workers, sometimes independent contractors. And their status as independent contractors rather than employees disqualifies them for labor protections that are already provided in Philippine laws. So just a screenshot of how a Cloudwork platform looks like for some of you who are not too familiar. It's a space that matches a worker and a client for particular kinds of jobs. The Philippines is one of the largest suppliers of labor in Cloudwork platforms, as you can see in this chart. Zooming into PHL there, somewhere in the right side. A large proportion of the work in Cloudwork is performed by workers in the global south, particularly in India, the Philippines, Ukraine, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. And noticeable in this image is that while online freelancing is taken up across the globe, the nature of clients, whether local or foreign, differ, as well as the average or median rates. In the Philippines, the bright blue circle around it indicates the predominance of foreign clients, meaning Filipino workers are servicing foreign clients, and the yellow inner circle implies that the median rates are at the low end, no? And with Bangladesh and Pakistan, PAK and BGD, sharing the same features. However, in the Philippine context, because of low average local wages and with our daily minimum wage only at around $10 per day, then the $3 to $5 median wage per hour may seem acceptable to a worker who can hustle around 8 hours or more of work in a day. On the other hand, location-based platforms are also growing, catering to local demand for ride-hailing, food, and last-mile delivery. And as I speak now, many more apparently are sprouting as local enterprises now beyond the large global platforms like Grab that have come much earlier. In the absence of official numbers, our research estimates close to 500,000 on-demand workers in the country. But in reality, we believe that this is more because platform workers are not normally accounted for in official statistics. So we based our estimates from some of the data shared with us by the platforms. We also found that platform labor is no longer just a source of supplementary income, but has become a major source of livelihood for many workers in the Philippines. And while this creates a boost to a struggling economy in the pandemic and more Filipinos, due to choice or lack of choice, are compelled to join the gig economy, we also see the challenges to the conditions that workers face. So in the Philippine context, where there is always already existing precarity and informality, how is platform labor perceived? And I wanted to highlight this background to better situate platform labor and also why it's seen as an opportunity for many Filipinos. historically, from pushing Filipinos as migrant workers to fully embracing business process outsourcing like call center work, the government has pushed the popularity of cloud work, or more popularly called online freelancing, as well as gig work in ride-hailing and delivery as a solution to unemployment. Statistical data in the Philippine Labor Force Survey shows around 3 million Filipinos without jobs. And this is normally an underestimate. Underemployment also remains significant, involving around 7.5 million Filipinos who take on multiple kinds of jobs. In the Philippines, a formal employment relationship is also not always the norm. The informal sector constitutes a big portion of the country's labor force, with around 15 million participating in vulnerable forms of employment. For cloud work, Filipino platform workers have been incorporated in the national government's push for what we call world-class service workers and modern heroes who bring in much-needed jobs and foreign currency into the country. Many online freelancers we talked to moved from the drudgery of night shifts in call center work, or have chosen to return home from the drudgery of doing migrant labor work to be with their families. On the other hand, ride-hailing and food delivery is seen as an opportunity for some workers, especially those displaced during the pandemic. For motorbike ride-hailing, it expanded and somewhat modernized an already existing labor. I think you might have this in Indonesia, experience riding it. We call it the habal-habal, no? A system where motorcycle drivers would hitch passengers or do food deliveries for small restaurants for personally negotiated rates. It's the rider who negotiates the rates with a passenger. But as it expanded in the metropolis, it expanded clientele to include middle-class workers in the city needing to navigate through traffic gridlocks. Thus, gig work is sometimes seen as a step up for some of the informal workers, such as habal-habal riders, pedicab riders, or tricycle riders. And this broader labor condition in the Philippines is further pushed by discourses of entrepreneurialism or flexibility, distinction, and heroism that is pushed by platforms and also by government. I'll talk about them quickly, one by one. So platforms, also government, use multiple signs. Some of them used to attract workers into this economy. They communicate to workers that they own their time. They are free to use their own resources and can earn as much as they want, depending on how much time and energy they are willing to invest. Of course, from the data that I will show later, actual data disproves this. But as intermediary agents between workers and clients, they are imbued with a lot of power to determine the rules of interaction and therefore embed politics and control in labor management in many ways. The second one is the trope of distinction. No? This pertains to the perceived exceptionality of Filipinos when it came to global skilled work because of their trained skills on service-orientedness and English proficiency. So cloud workers particularly situated themselves with a long history of Filipinos who are fulfilling labor shortages throughout the world as nurses and domestic workers, as seafarers, cooks, and cleaners. And this is predominantly constructed as a natural global order of things that Filipinos should accede to and benefit from. This is how the government frames it for Filipinos. Thus, articulating the characteristics of distinction enables the nation branding of Filipino online freelancers as valuable and competitive world-class workers. However, it constructs Filipino subjects as a global commodity and a colonized subject. Connected to this is the identification of gig workers, drivers and delivery riders. You can see the photo on the bottom down right side, as more advanced and modernized than their counterparts like jeepney drivers or taxi drivers or habal-habal riders because they work with technology and apps. The attractiveness of the nature of work is conveyed through multiple signs, sometimes using the celebrities as signifier, despite how far their realities might be from the actual worker experience. And the last trope, in the pandemic context especially, we could see the articulation of modern day heroes, or the hero trope, to platform workers. It is interesting how press releases on Riders as real superheroes on the road surfaced after the controversial issue of a platform's poor management and behind workers' sudden protest activity. But these mechanisms essentially do not just work for the riders alone. They work to normalize the acceptability of on-demand work and our understanding of it as a viable, decent, and even altruistic work opportunity for Filipinos that does not need questioning. For Cloudwork, under the same trope of heroes, the label of modern heroes and world-class workers that have been previously attributed to overseas Filipino workers, Filipinos who go overseas to work, are being gradually conferred on online freelance workers too. They were thought to be now OFW 2.0, no longer overseas Filipino workers, but now online freelance worker. This was because through digital labor, one still earns dollars and performs as a global worker, only this time without having to be away from home. But in reality, whether we look at cloud work or on-demand work, there's a list of challenges that workers face. And when I juxtapose them side by side, there is some variability, but essentially they seem to be parallel. First is the issue of variable pay and the lack of social security benefits, particularly for on-demand workers who have spoken to us. They complain about opaque pay structures. They don't know how their pays are actually calculated. Of course, coupled with that is the lack of other forms of social security benefits. In cloud work, workers assume significant costs. They buy their own laptops and paraphernalia. They pay for their own electricity, their own workspace at the home, including the payment transaction costs. When the client is going to pay them, they often assume that cost. And on the other hand, for on-demand workers, they of course pay for fuel, supplies, internet data connectivity costs, and sometimes vehicle repayments as well. And as Uz mentioned, in the case of Germany, there are no safety nets, and in more so in platforms operating in the Philippines. So this operates both in cloud work, although in the context of cloud work, some workers are able to negotiate some sick pay, but this time more directly with clients, and depending on whether clients would actually choose to give them after building some form of trust with the clients over a period of time of work. Common to both kinds of platform workers is labor seasonality. It's hard to depend on the platform because there will be times that there's a lot of work, but there will be seasons when they cannot find work at all. And as we have seen in the context of the pandemic, especially for on-demand workers and ride-hailing, many of the workers we talked to, their cars had been taken away from them because they could no longer sustain the monthly amortization or contributions, believing in the promises of this work, but no longer could sustain the payment of the cars. And then both are exposed to risks. Cloud workers are exposed to scams, meaning, for example, designers who have done the design, but ending up not getting paid by the client. Some platforms have safeguards for this, others don't. On the other hand, on-demand workers are exposed to tons of risks. Illnesses, injuries, accidents, and also scams, wherein someone would order a bulk of delivery. Not only is the worker unpaid for that delivery that is by a scammer, the worker now has to pay for the food that scammer ordered because the platform will not pay or cover for that scam delivery. Cloud workers have also spoken to us. Some of them would lament the lack of career progression because some of the design work or some of the other kinds of jobs that they perform, they could not put them necessarily in the CVs, or they would lament that they feel like in comparison to their previous work where they can see very clear progression, this one they're not quite sure how they could build their skills. Others who are more entrepreneurial are able to do so. On the bottom are less tangible kinds of challenges. So common promise of platform labor is flexibility, both for cloud work and also for on-demand work. But for cloud work, in reality, workers lament the false control over time and strict work management because they work under time monitoring apps. Because they're paid, because many of them are paid per hour, so the work softwares have embedded in them time monitoring apps. So they need to work and move their mouse so that the other side would know that they are working. And the same goes for on-demand work. Workers talk to us that there are monitoring systems embedded in the app that tracks their location, the paths that they take, when they are not taking rides, and so on and so forth. There's also the issue of impersonal management in the sense that when they have complaints or they have questions about the calculations of their rates, they have to talk to a chat support system. Some chat support systems work better than others, but others kind of are non-human interactions that makes it very difficult for them to articulate their concerns. And finally, for cloud workers, I'm not saying that this is not an issue for on-demand workers. It's just that the workers who talked to did not particularly highlight that. But dissatisfaction and lack of meaning in work was prominent for some of the cloud workers. One feature of this is where sometimes they are, upon entering into a contract, suddenly they will get to have to do work that kind of violates what they will be prepared to do. So some of them would share to us that they're suddenly forced to do black hat strategies or other kinds of things that they did not anticipate that they actually have to do. So now I wanted to highlight a little bit more about what we have found from the Fair Work Philippines ratings. And again, our Fair Work Philippines study focused more on geographically tethered apps, and the labor that is done here and the conditions of workers there. So of the 9 platforms that we studied in the Philippines, and sadly, only 4 of them scored any points. So in this league table, there are 3 that are ride hailing. That's Grab Car for 4 wheels, and Angkas and Joyride are 2 wheels or motorbike taxi. And then all the rest are food and last mile delivery. Just to zoom in a little bit more on the scores in terms of the principles of fairness that Oz spoke about earlier, I wanted to highlight that the platforms that achieved scores only for the basic point, the first point on fair conditions, fair contracts, and fair representation. So 4 of 9 platforms achieved scores for fair conditions, meaning they had mechanisms to mitigate task-specific risks. There were also platforms that scored for fair contracts and fair management. But again, 5 of 9 platforms did not score any points there. And importantly, in terms of fair pay, no platform could evidence guaranteeing that workers earn above the daily minimum wage after costs of approximately $10 US. As I mentioned, workers also talk to us about the block box of rate calculations. They are not quite sure how their rates are calculated and how it appears that it suddenly sometimes, the per kilometer rate suddenly goes down or at a certain point in time. There is importantly unpaid labor time. It's not just the labor time of waiting for a gig to come, but it's also the waiting time for food to be packed, or deliveries to be packed, or for customers to come down. So all these are unpaid, in the context of their work. One thing that I wanted to highlight is that, lured by the opportunities and promises of the platform economy, some workers are compelled to invest in a car, sometimes a motorbike or a mobile device. They would borrow money from money lenders or go for loans in the assumption that they would be able to recuperate this. Some also pay contractors under a subcontracting agreement. So due to these arrangements, including the vehicle or mobile device repayments that they make, but plus all the rest of the costs that they shoulder on their own, they are barely able to take home the minimum wage after costs are taken out. So initially, it might seem that they are earning okay, but at the gross level, but when you deduct all the things that they have to pay, they fall into highly vulnerable conditions. The next one that I wanted to highlight is that although they brand platform workers as freelancers who can work their own time whenever they want, in And in reality, in the absence of regulation, different delivery platforms insidiously dictate working conditions and the conduct and compliance with work guidelines. One platform, for example, uses a batching system for its riders, batch 1, 2, 3, and 4, up to 6. Putting the worker in a particular batch significantly influences the base rate that the worker gets for each transaction, and also the likelihood that the worker would be prioritized for future deliveries. How are workers placed in batches? Well, there are criteria, whether they are able to perform at par with recommended guidelines of good performance, such as not canceling rides, working for a recommended number of hours during peak times and days, as you can see in the slide. There are many more mechanisms that dictate control, and the other one that's indirect control is that platforms can hire as many workers as they want without control, which also affects workers' wait times. This creates a race for many workers to deliver work in the best way that they can, to accept any rides thrown at them, because amid this hyper competition, they know that they are easily dispensable. And then lastly, what I wanted to highlight is that as individuals, riders may feel intimidated to raise concerns or complaints. So workers attempt to come together to articulate their concerns. However, there can be sanctions that workers face when they collectively organize, as in this example. So again, because they are seen to be independent contractors, platforms sometimes penalize them when they come together to protest. This is what happened in the case of Foodpanda riders who came together, and the platform chose to attend to their concerns individually. Thankfully, the Philippine National Labor Relations Commission ruled against the platform and for the workers. However, the situation is currently appealable under our Supreme Court. And I understand that the platform has apparently been talking to consider appealing the situation. So I move now to the last part of my presentation, which is to highlight also that workers are not facing this passively. As more efforts from various sectors highlight these precarious conditions, workers are starting to get more and more emboldened to express collective voice. It was not the case, in fact, when we started this research 2 years ago for ride-hailing and food delivery. Before, it was mostly Facebook groups of workers trying to exchange strategies for self-help and platform workarounds on these Facebook groups, the photo on the left. Now, more independent collective bodies of workers are sprouting. In fact, the photo on the right, Delivery Riders Unite. So Centro of Gig Workers, a union, was launched just last night, which was quite exciting time for labor organizing amongst the gig workers. Now for cloud workers, there's no union and no sprouting formations of a union, but there are many ways by which workers are coming together to support each other, albeit we call this entrepreneurial solidarities. Workers come together in Facebook groups to share strategies on how to navigate the ambiguities of the Cloudwork platform economy. They share aspirational stories and visualizations of success, sometimes driven by influencer workers in the platforms, and these create norms and standards of value. There's also a recently listed workers cooperative, but they essentially work in the same way. They help workers navigate through the platform labor economy, as opposed to directly challenging the abusive conditions of the platform economy. So I'll close with a few concluding thoughts. So the ambivalent marginality of platform workers in the Philippine labor economy shows that platform labor presents an opportunity for workers with no better options. And it highlights the need to look outside and in the bigger context of the labor economy or the conditions in the Philippines, which makes platform labor, despite its onerous conditions for workers, palatable for workers. And this is further pushed by discourses that construct platform labor as flexible, distinctive, modern, and heroic. And government has to balance its attention to promoting platforms vis-a-vis pushing for greater safeguards by platforms towards the protection of workers. So in this vulnerabilities in the local labor economy, platforms capitalize on it and enact veiled controls while providing limited social safeguards and accountabilities. And finally, workers articulate, nonetheless, agency strategies of negotiation and collective voice as a result of their intent to survive and thrive. It's not out of the benevolence of platforms, it's amid the absence of these social protections and safeguards that are not provided to them by government or by the platforms. And so, again, echoing what Uz was saying earlier, it needs civil society support to supplement workers' efforts to organize and to exert greater pressure towards platforms and the government to act towards promoting fairer and decent conditions for workers. I'll end here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cheryl, for the insightful presentation. See you later on the Q&A session. Okay, everyone. Our last speaker is Suci Lestari Yuwana from Indonesia. Bu Yuwana is a lecturer at the Department of International Relations, Universitas Gadjah Mada, Indonesia. Currently, she is pursuing her doctoral degree in the Copernicus Institute of Sustainable Development in Utrecht University. Her research focused on the socio-political dynamic of digital platforms and its impact to sustainability transition studies. She has published papers and book chapters in national and international journals, mainly discussing about the politics of digital platforms in developing economies. In April 2022, her work has been referred in the MIT Technology Review as part of AI Colonialism series reportage. Please welcome Ibu Yuwana. Selamat sore, Bu Yuwana. How are you?
Sore, I'm Melinda. Alhamdulillah, sehat. Hello, everyone. Thank you for inviting me here.
Okay, Ibu Yuwana, please continue. Please start the presentation. Good luck.
Okay, so in anticipating my bad internet connections and to keep the time efficient, I will share a video where I have recorded my presentations here. So, hi everyone. Thank you for inviting me in this great opportunity to discuss about the platform economy and the future of work. Well, here I will share my reflections on the Indonesian experience over more than 5 years of working in this topic. Well, in this picture, you can see there is a man who looks tired, overworked while doing his job as a delivery guy or as riders of online taxis in Indonesia. And I think this picture could represent the worst scenario of the future of work in the platform economy. Why I chose this picture to begin my discussions? It's because I think everyone could enjoy a good future scenario. But if we can embrace the worst scenario and take into account what will be the risks of the future, we can be more prepared for anything that will happen in the future. So in this talk, I will share 3 points. First one, what makes me optimistic about the platform economy in Indonesia? And the second, what makes me pessimistic about it? And the third one, what do I think about the future of work in the platform economy in Indonesia? Well, the first point is that what makes me optimistic about it is throughout working in this topic for more than 5 years, I observed that the trend of digitalization in the platform economy in Indonesia has successfully scaling up the informal economy in Indonesia. And these trends, I think, could bring more progressive and important impact into the social and economic development in Indonesia. Well, in Indonesia, informal economy, or now the gig economy, if you understand gig economy as a service from a door-to-door service, I would say that this kind of gig economy has long been existed for decades in Indonesia. And now the introductions of digital platform has somehow scaled up the way the services being operated, from motorbike taxis, from grocery shoppings, from waste collections, or even from cleaning services. And this kind of scaling up the informal economy has also been globally recognized quite recently by the Queen Maxima of the Netherlands, who gave her remarks in the G20 side events at 30 October 2021. In her remarks, she said that Indonesia is one of the inspiring examples on how digital platform can improve the financial inclusions for small medium enterprise. In her remarks, she mentioned Gojek as a ride-hailing app, which used digital ecosystem to help small business to digitize their inventory management, marketing, payment, credit, and sales. And now suddenly these small medium enterprises are connected to a larger world, and many of them become leap forward and expand their business beyond their brick and mortar presence. Another example on how the optimizations, or how I feel optimistic about Indonesian's platform economy is from the number of mobile internet users in Indonesia. If we look at it from 2017 until 2020, we have at least 176 millions of mobile internet users, which is a very large numbers for mobile internet user. And from this amount, 81% of mobile internet subscribers have adopted digital payment via mobile wallets as of May 2021. And this adoption is higher than in other countries in the region, such as Singapore, Vietnam, and the Philippines. And if we look at from the investment sectors, according to a research by Google Temasek Bain Company in 2021, the investment value of the Indonesian digital economy during the first quarter of 2021 was $4.7 billion US. And this number has exceeded the highest value for the last 4 years. This achievement makes Indonesia the most popular investment destination in Southeast Asia, even surpassing the Singapore as the neighboring countries. So this kind of achievement of platform economy in Indonesia makes me very optimistic about the futures of platform economies and also futures of work in Indonesia. But of course, this story is not a fairy tale story. There are also some weaknesses, challenges, limitations that Indonesians happen. And that leads me into my second point, what makes me pessimistic about it. Of course, there are many critics, concerns about the platform economy in Indonesia, even from economic, social sector, political sectors, etc. But one thing that makes me very concerned, and I think it's of informal workers in the digital ecosystem. And I think this argument has been resonated with a lot of research that has been conducted in Indonesia. One research, for example, is from Frey in 2020, in which it says that there is a wave of informalization of job brought by this platform economy globally. But she mentions that in what makes it very specific in Indonesia or in the near south is that this kind of workforce who live in precarious condition and unprotected work has long been the norm in Indonesia, even long before the platform economy existed. So what does it mean? I think it means that the introductions of platform economy could worsening the precarious and unprotected working conditions of the informal workers in Indonesia. And I'm not trying to make it more scary, but the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, has even bring more detrimental effect toward the working conditions of informal workers in Indonesia. According to data from Central Bureau of Statistics of Indonesia, during the COVID-19 in 2020, at least there is 3.84% of population quit their job because of the pandemic. And it's also resonate with the data on how the numbers of informal workers from 2019 to 2020 is increasing from 70 million into 75 million, while the total workforce in Indonesia in that year is around 135 million. So it's almost more than half population working in informal economy. And if we don't do anything to try to improve the conditions of informal worker, or trying to increase the mobility, the vertical mobility of informal worker, this will become the biggest homework for Indonesia laborers and also workforce. A report from Fair Work Indonesia in 2021 also shares similar working conditions on how platform workers' working condition is not really good in Indonesia. If we look at from the score, most of the platform has less, or at least 5 to less score from the Fair Work report. That also include a very long hours per week, and in average 70 to 100 hours a week, no fair contract, no fair representations for the workers' organization, only less communications policy, and also less protections worker policies. So, and despite all of this working conditions of platform workers, that I think I also found there is a misleading strategies shared mostly by this platform company. What kind of strategies? I found that usually most of company will advertise their platform job by using the how many income they will get per month, and usually this income will be quite big income in compared to the formal work. Like, for example, Gojek Gojek over 10 million rupiah per month in 2015, and also Octopus, which is a platform company in waste collectors, also advertised that you work in our company, you will get at least 10 million rupiah per month. And quite recently, AirAsia also do similar advertisement. And what is actually misleading into this advertisement is that this advertisement not only attract the informal workers, but it also attract the non-informal workers who wants to have a steady income, who wants to have a bigger income, like the 10 million rupiah per month. So it makes a more difficult competitions for informal workers to enter the platform workforce, especially those group of informal workers who don't have access to mobile phone, who don't have access to the internet, who don't know how to operate the digital platform. This group become very vulnerable and will most likely they will be neglected in the platform workforce. And I think this also resonates with my current research and publications about the conditions of drivers or of online taxi, where during my interview, I found this metaphor of drug addictions metaphor. So in the interview, I tried to ask how do they feel about their working conditions. And one of the representations of drivers told me that their life looks like a drug, like they having this drug addictions. Why? Because at the beginning they have this higher income based on the bonus and everything, and then they decided to change their job of online taxi from part-time to full-time. So now they depend on all of their income from these online taxis. But as you can see in the interview, he said that first we got comfortable, but over time, the dose or the bonus of becoming online taxi drivers are reduced, and we become addicted and dependent. So now this is our main income, and we don't have many exit options. So I think if we keep doing the same business as usual in the platform economy, this drug addiction metaphor will inevitably become one of most likely future scenario of the future of work in the platform economy. So now I'm talking a lot about the futures scenario. I'm going into my third points is on the future of work. What do I think about this future of work? Well, I would like to share my ongoing project in my PhD studies, where we're trying to find a way to have a more collective imaginary about the future of work. Because personally, I think when we discuss about how what is desirable future of on platform economy, it is not fair to only listen to those powerful actors in technology company to determine the future of work. I think we also need to embrace to listen any stakeholders in the platform economy and take into account their imaginaries to shape the future of work. So what do we do? Here we have three possible scenarios of online taxi in Indonesia, which is the transformation, where in the next 10 years, we imagine that online taxi will become the main services in Indonesia, where people use it every day for daily use. And then the second scenario, this optimization, where we imagine that the online taxi service will exist hand in hand with the public transport services. So online taxi services will only function as feeders or the first and last mile commute. And the third scenario is on decentralizations, where we imagine that there will be more local actors growing in Indonesia, where the local government act as the supporter for these local players. So we offer these three different scenarios to each of the stakeholder, which is the policymakers, the driver organizations, the user organization, as well as the expert in digital economy and expert in transportation. And we ask them how pessimistic they are to each of the scenario and how optimistic they are to each of the scenario. And the result that we found is that from the three scenarios that we offer, they feel most optimistic to the optimization scenario, which is on the middle. But if we look at the length of the bar, the length of the bar represents the level of uncertainty. So what we can see here is that in general, the stakeholder feel most optimistic with the scenario of optimization, but they also still have high level of uncertainty toward the future of these optimization scenarios. And another finding, we also found that there are 4 different future scenarios, because during the interview, we also trying to invite our respondent to give another future scenario that they think will happen in the future, which is these 4 scenarios are technology leapfrogging, autonomous vehicle, Jakarta as the pilot for innovations, and the online taxi as the substitution. And what also another important finding that we found is that talking about the future of work, we also need to unpack what makes the scenario of optimization become uncertain for all of our stakeholders. So what we found is we're trying to unpack the criteria that they think will somehow shape the future of platform economy in Indonesia. Here we found 19 criteria that we categorize into 4 sectors, which is in economic sector, government regulation, social, and technology. These 19 criteria is actually resonate a lot with the current debate that is going on about the future of platform economy, or debate about the online taxis in specific. Like, for example, take into account the category in social, the criteria of labor exploitation, health, pensions, insurance, driver organization, consumer organizations, gender empowerment are actually similar with the current protest that is going on and driven by the driver organization. These criteria are actually the criteria that they demand the government to take into account and make policy to improve these conditions. So, well, what also interesting that I found is during our interview, it's quite interesting to see from policymakers, for example, there are 0 social criteria that become, how to say, a factor of appraisal for the policymakers. And for drivers and users, there is no criteria from technology sector, which means that for society, for drivers, for users, community, discussing about economic impact, social impact, and how the government regulations protect their right is much more important rather than discussing the future of technology itself. I have so many things to discuss, so many insights actually from this finding, and I would love to discuss it with you later on question and answer. But I would like to close my talks today by talking about by taking into account what I wrote in my ongoing project about the future's imaginary. My current conclusions shows that how the future imaginaries are never purely about particular technology, but more about value and expectation of that technology to fulfill. And in my study case, in our study case in Indonesia, shows how the non-technological aspect are more prominent than the technical aspect in the articulated socio-technical imaginaries. Thank you for your attentions and looking forward for having a fruitful discussions with you.
Thank you so much, Ibu Yohana, for the insightful presentation. And now I want to invite Oz and Cheryl back to the screen because the Q&A session is about to begin. Okay. Hello again, Cheryl and Oz. Okay, we already have some questions from our participants, but I would like to start this Q&A session with my own question. So I've been wondering, is there any connection between identity and how does should we be concerned that certain identity or certain group of people are going to disproportionately affected by the poor working conditions under a platform economy, or is the system like blind towards identity, so everyone could be the victim and everyone could be oppressed in the same amount of oppression? Is there any of you want to answer the question first?
I can take a first stab at it.
Okay.
The system, the economy itself actually accentuates, it actually highlights even further the structural discrimination that is in place in many of the countries, in all of the countries that we basically look at. So if there is, for example, if racism is an issue, and racism is an issue in every society, it's something that we battle as communities, we battle as activists, etc., but it still stays, right? Racism, xenophobia, based on, your gender could be one. It's not that the platforms actively promote discrimination. Platforms actually, in most cases, try to implement policies, or if they don't have any, through discussions with Fair Work researchers, they try to come up with these anti-discrimination policies, and not just as a policy, as a statement saying, we as a platform don't discriminate. That's not what we want to see. We want to see actual policies, the policy in practice of the platform trying to do something. And of course, we understand a single platform is not going to be able to change an entire, ideology or an entire attitude that's endemic to society, that's structural itself. But we also expect these platforms to take at least a stab at it. And, because they are an important part of the economy, they employ a lot of people, they interact with a lot of customers. So this did become quite an issue in Germany, but also in other contexts as well for us, where talking especially to workers with that are coming from other countries that, for example, may not be speaking good German, if any German at all, because it is not necessarily a criteria to be employed by some of these platforms. That may have, based on their religion or the way they identify themselves, that may dress differently, that may have headscarves, turbans, based on, as I said, their religion or their how they identify themselves, and or simply based on how they look, where they come from, which can be an identifier for being different. So, a lot of these platform workers are engaging with society on a constant daily basis. They are out on the streets. They are very visible. They are going into private spaces of people's homes to clean, for example, or to deliver food. So this does become an issue. And this is something that as Fair Work, we are taking very seriously and pushing platforms, as I mentioned before, to implement policies to at least become a part of, a vehicle for changing these things that we don't want to see in our societies.
Thank you, Oz, for your response. Ibiana or Cheryl, you may want to add something to that. Okay, with Cheryl.
Right, yeah. Accentuating biases and also reinforcing societal biases generally. And I guess this is why this idea of fair management in the Fair Work principles emphasizes this point there, particularly because marginalized groups are likely to get further discriminated within these conditions. So we ask the question of whether platforms actively institute mechanisms to make it less likely for these already existing marginalized groups to get further marginalized, whether by virtue of algorithmic management systems, how workers are matched with workers, or how they are deprivileged from getting matched, or by the mechanisms by which they are protected, say from traveling at night, or by how they are treated by the workers. So we look at this, and it's very well incorporated in the principles that we try to advance for platforms to uphold. In the context of Cloudwork, I guess one of the mechanisms where these biases will be more apparent is how workers from the Global South who might be thinking that this is the kinds of rates that they deserve may be pulling down the rates even as they can bid for them. And so again, as a push by Fair Work is to set wage floors, so that kind of to lessen the possibilities that workers who think, oh, $1 per hour is okay with me, is kind of to avoid that, and the clients who will take advantage of those workers who are bidding for very low rates. So some platforms are acting on it, but some platforms are not.
Okay, thank you, Cheryl. It seems that Bu Yohana want to share some thought on this question. Okay.
Yes, I think I agree with August and also Cheryl on how actually this digital platform are hierarchy in natures, which means their system is not egalitarian, is not equal, treating people who are working in the system. Why I say that? Because, for example, if we look at how the algorithmic matching work, they don't actually identify who has digital skill, who can understand how to operate mobile phones or not.
So I think one discrimination that automatically happens in the system is to divide those who understand digital technology and those who understand it. And in the context of Indonesia, I think it affects a lot of informal workers. It affects a lot of group of informal workers who are vulnerable in understanding of digital skills. And I think of course, the movement to improve the awareness of this digital skill is important to do, but I think we also need a more proactive programs from the platform itself to include this vulnerable group, how to make them more accepted in the platform.
Thank you, Bu Yoana, for the answer. Now let's move on to the questions that have been asked by our participants. Oh, okay, I'm going to read the question from Saskia. Her question is, in the Fairwork project itself, has there any research that explores the opportunity of decentralized autonomous organizations in platform economy? Because she would love to connect and explore possibilities to partner with Fairwork because as she's currently building platform as well. So maybe this question would be directed to Oz and also Cheryl.
As far as I know, no, we don't have. But then again, I am mostly focused on what we call the geographically tethered platforms and not Cloudwork platforms. So I know that a lot of DACs actually employ like freelancing, that work on freelancing models for maybe Cloudwork. So maybe that might be more relevant for the Cloudwork researchers. But as far as I know, no.
Bu Cheryl, do you want to add something to that?
Yeah, not in the capacity of my research with Fairwork, and also our research on Cloudwork focused more on ethnographically understanding the conditions of workers. But yeah, it's true, the emergence of DAOs would be very interesting. We have seen some community-led organizations, not particularly raising themselves as DAOs for that matter, but we have seen some former workers who have come together to set up platform co-ops. But unfortunately, they didn't get any sustainability. They had to shut down, especially during the pandemic. But that would have been a promising sample of an organization on Cloudwork. They were establishing a locally based Cloudwork platform. Unfortunately, they could not sustain themselves.
Okay, thank you, Cheryl and Oz. Saskal, so yeah, Oz, you want to add something?
I was just gonna add something real quick. I mean, there are platform co-ops we look at, but platform co-ops I think are something different than these decentralized autonomous organizations, which are kind of a new phenomenon itself. Like they are actually a product, as far as I know, and I know very little about them. So please take it with a grain of salt. What I know is that they actually work on like the Bitcoin markets. Like they're sort of like an offshoot of that, and that's like the new way of organizing workplace that is that works on its own algorithm and not so different from the platforms we look at because they also work on algorithms. But as far as I know, like worker co-ops we look at, but the DACs not exactly, no.
Okay then. Saska also has another follow-up question. It's still for Cheryl and Oz. The question is, how Fairwork Foundation take into account the platform's customer demand that impacted the fairness that can be provided by the platform?
I guess I'll go first again, and it seems like that's like kind of become the norm here. So we actually, this is a very good question because you're gonna see a lot of platforms that come to us and say, but we don't, this is not our responsibility. We're just a marketplace. We're just there, making sure that the customer and the worker has a platform to reach each other and then do their business, right? And this is not something that we buy into, because It's the platform's responsibility to also supervise this relationship, not just simply throw the worker at the mercy of the customer in this case. This happens quite often with like domestic work platforms, for example, which mostly work on freelancing models. And they, at least in Germany, we see that they present themselves as basically a marketplace where, you know, like an eBay kind of place where there's a buyer and a seller, and then whatever happens there, you know, we're not going to take any responsibility kind of. That's not correct, because at the end of the day, the worker is using that platform to reach out to that customer. And if something goes wrong in that relationship between the customer, then the worker, like, who is the worker going to go to? It should be the platform that is the first respondent in that case, right? If, for example, the worker does not get the money that they were promised, or if the worker has a bad experience working with that customer, is treated wrongly, etc. Of course, there can be other legal steps that are taken if the situation is serious, but it should be the platform that provides also these services to the worker, so that the worker knows which steps to follow and whom to address their concerns to, basically.
Thank you. Cheryl?
I'm not sure if I understood the question precisely, but what I'd say is that platforms will not exist without customers that buy the work, or clients that buy the work. And the Fair Work Pledge that was shown earlier highlights how a pressure on business organizations that might contract platforms, say, for example, my university, because we have been in the pandemic, my university sends out food coupons using platform coupons to give us our meeting food, for example. So many organizations tap into these platforms. And if we advance the idea that customers should be working with platforms that are advancing fairer conditions for their workers, I guess that's where Fair Work factors in that prominently, creating a space where the broader society could get to buy in to supporting fairer conditions for workers, and supporting platforms that advance those conditions more than others.
Thank you, Cheryl, for the response. The next question is for Bu Yuana. The question is from Cheryl Maulidi. He asked, it seems that there will be consequences of the optimization of platform facilitated service and future vision under smart cities idea, as there will be less need for formal work. When the formal work mode cannot absorb excess labor, informal platform-based work will emerge as a solution. Are there any other ways to deal with the unemployment, in your opinion, Bu Yuana?
Okay, thank you, Khairul Maulidi, for the questions. I think in case of unemployment, informal jobs would become the safety net for anyone, not only the informal workers, but also formal workers who lost their job. And I think that the safety net, what do they do after that, is to take this informal job, like becoming motorbike taxi drivers, or opening small medium enterprise, etc. But I think in those mechanisms, there is unfairness existed. What kind of unfairness? One thing for sure is there is an inequality of mobility between workers. So it is easier for formal workers, for people who already have a university degree, to choose whether they want to work in the formal job or informal job. They have those two options, but it is not possible for a worker who doesn't have a university degree, who maybe only have an elementary school degree, to choose formal jobs. And I think that's our problem that we need to fix. What we need to fix is how can we make this vertical mobility more fluid? How can we give more options for people who only have options in informal work, for people who only have degree in elementary school, to also have an options to get a job in a formal work. And I think there is many way to do that. And one possible way to do that is actually by utilizing the data that that already exists in the platform applications. For example, a motorbike driver in Gojek or in Grab, every day they doing their order, they actually collecting data for themselves. They collecting data of how many order they conducted per day. They collecting data how many income they get per day. They collecting data of the ratings, of the review from the customers. And actually, I think these kind of data can be utilized for the sake of the worker itself. This kind of data can be utilized as, for example, as a CV for the worker to apply for a formal job. And that is something we don't have in Indonesia right now. This is something that me and my team are initially trying to do. And I think that could be an option to increase the fluidity of vertical mobility of informal workers.
Thank you, Guyono, for the answer. Okay, next we have Dian Fatmawati here, who is wondering, from the Fair Work survey that has been done, which country that has on average the highest rating score? And comparing Germany and Philippines, is Germany's score higher than the Philippines, or maybe it's the other way around? Could you, Cheryl and Oz, please help me answering this question?
I guess just a quick word of caution that the scores are not always easily comparable, especially because some of the principles and the specific operationalization of the principles changed over the years. So one country's score needs to be taken with caution in comparing it to another country's score. But having said this, I can see that O's replied to the question on the chat, no? And I agree that I guess pressure by way of government regulation might matter in a sense, or governmental policies that may have an impact on pressuring platforms to do something better might be a factor here. So for example, I will not name the platform, but there's a platform that offers or provides sick pay for up to 180 days within Southeast Asia, another Southeast Asian country. But that same benefit is not available in the Philippines. And I was asking, why is that? Well, we found that out in the course of the research. We have no clear answers to that. But certainly, it could be that there is greater pressure for platforms operating in that country to give that benefit, as opposed to the Philippines, where particularly labor laws in relation to the gig economy is kind of behind, not in catching up.
Yeah, as Cheryl has rightly put it, it really depends on the country context. The principles are this. I mean, the principles change every year. We have meetings every year where we discuss the principles as a whole team of 30 countries all coming together, because the principles are the way they apply, the way they're operationalized in each country. It depends on the country context. Of course, we're still looking at the same principles here. We're still looking at the same criteria, but their interpretation to some extent is left to the country teams. But, you know, as I said, the country context matters also within the case of the legal context. In some countries, the local minimum wage is so low that, no one can, make a living on such a low minimum wage. In the case of Germany, it's still low. If you, ask people, that's the reason why soon they're going to be increasing it to 12 euros an hour. And that's going to require, like, what if they increase it to 12 euros an hour and platforms who are not on employment contracts, who do not offer employment contracts, but offer freelance-based jobs where the worker gets to set the wage, does not set it to 12. So that means that, a platform who may have gotten that score last year is not going to get that score this year. So those scores are also not set in stone. Every year, we look at the same platforms or add new platforms to the list that we have. And depending on how the principle has changed, but also how the legal context or the local context has changed, the platforms may score higher or lower, depending, as I said, like on these factors. So these are all put into consideration year after year when we are re-evaluating these platforms and redoing all the interviews with both the workers and the management, and then discussing the scores with sometimes new team members, sometimes other external team members that come in to finalize the scores, basically.
Okay, thank you, Cheryl. And also, yeah, if I may add, because I also working on the research for Indonesian team. In Indonesia, we have to adjust some principles because, for example, we don't really have standard living wage here. So we have to find what's the equivalent of a standard living wage in Indonesia. And the standard in the principles, we try to improve the principles all the time. So maybe one platform will get decent scores this year, maybe next year they will get lower score, and that's always happen because the principle is always being improved. Okay, so let's move on to other question from Melissa. Melissa LG. The question is, since most or some of the Cloudwork platforms are not local based, do workers expect the local government to play a role in addressing the challenges they face, or instead all responsibility is on the platform? I think this question would be suitable for Yuana than Cheryl, because there are many platforms in both countries that are based in other countries, and often government is not really hands-on in regulating the platform. So please, Cheryl or Yuana.
Yuana, okay, I can go first. The question is asking about the workers' expectations, whether the expectations of cloud workers go to the government or to the platforms more. So in our research, the cloud workers' expectations from the government is more of to help them with training, for example, or to help them with improving the quality of internet connectivity. In terms of training, the expectation is that they will train them so that they will be placed in a better negotiating capacity with clients. So for example, if your skills are more of the micro task kind, then most likely the rates that you will demand from the platform will be commanding lower rates. But if you can get training that will prepare you for asking for higher rates, then workers feel that will be better. But it's more of that than bargaining for structural changes that cloud work platforms can institute and asking government to do anything about that. And this, despite cloud work platforms being globally set, I believe, Oz could correct me here, or Yuana, but I believe that there has been a case in the context of Crowdflower where the local, a country labor law has been engaged to kind of in the context of workers trying to find for a settlement agreement to claim for minimum wages. So they invoke the U.S. Fair Labor Standards Act, in my understanding, and they apparently, in my understanding, that Crowdflower was put in a spotlight in that context, invoking a labor law. So I think it might be possible, but in the Philippine context, we are quite far from this. The government is still at the stage of promoting cloud work as a jobs generation mechanism because it helps assuage the numbers in terms of ICT jobs generation.
Yeah, I think I will add a little bit on that. What would be the expectations from workers to the government in the case of the cloud workers? Well, based on my research, or when we discuss about the futures of work in the platform economy, there are 4 criteria in social, technology, economy, and also, as well as in the government regulations. I think overall, in general, the expectations toward the government role is as enabler for this Cloudworks to work. What does it mean as enabler? First, in terms of technology, the expectations is for the government to provide a better digital infrastructures as well as a mechanism to improve on digital talents. And in terms of social and economic sectors, there is an expectation on how to improve or not improve, how to minimize labor exploitations by a strong law that recognize the positions of this cloud work, which is actually now in Indonesia, we're still very much debating about the classification of this work. And I think that will be the first step from the governments to formally recognize the distinction of this cloud work and gig workers. In that sense, it will give legal protections for this worker to do that job.
Thank you so much, Ibu Cheryl and Ibu Yohana, for your answer. And the question from Melissa will be our last question. And now we have come to the end of the Q&A session. But before I wrap up this event, I would like to hear some closing remarks from Bu Yohana, Ibu Cheryl, and us regarding what do you think of the future of work and what can we do to create a better and fairer working conditions for everyone, especially gig worker? Maybe we could start with Bu Yohana and then us, and lastly, Ibu Cheryl.
Thank you. I think when we discuss about the future of work, it is very important to have collective imaginary to decide and navigate where are the future of works. I think in my presentations, I mentioned the way I see right now in Indonesia, we tend to listen more on these powerful actors in technology companies or powerful actors who have more access to the platform economy, but we not really listen to people or to the stakeholders who also depend on their life in this platform economy. So then in that sense, I would urge for us to have more collective imaginary about the futures of platform works.
Just echoing what Joanna has said, in this economy, we often, I mean, depends on where, of course, in the last year, things have been changing a little, I think, due to activism, but we often read numbers, money, a lot of dollar signs, euro signs, companies becoming unicorns. What's a unicorn? That's $1 billion company that, you know, gets investment. So a lot of investment money. We read a lot of that, especially during COVID, because of the inflation of the markets when it comes to platform economy. So we've seen a lot of new actors come into play, but also a lot of these actors getting a ton of investment money, billions, in some cases, millions accumulating into $1 billion or more in many cases. But what happened in the last couple of months? That money is gone now. Now there is recession in some countries. There is also investment fear, because we know at this stage, many of these platforms are actually operating on losses. They're not making profit. Even the big ones out there that operate multinationally are operating on losses. And that means this money is speculative. So the economy itself is also speculative. I don't foresee the platform economy or the platforms themselves to cease to exist. I think platform economy is the future in one form or the other. But it's our responsibility to ask ourselves, in what form do we want to see this future economy to unfold? And here, two things come to mind. I think first is for a lot of policymakers, a lot of things are still like on the table waiting to be dealt with. And one of the big ones out there is the classification of work that Joanna and Cheryl have also underlined. What kind of work does this consist of? Is this something that can be included in a contract? And if so, that also brings workers with a lot of safety nets, right? With a lot of benefits. And if not, then does that mean that workers have to continue on working on precarious conditions and be at the mercy of risks that are out there, be at the mercy of another pandemic that just gets rid of all the jobs out there. So that's something to discuss. And of course, we are in favor of a very swift discussion. The EU is right now having this discussion and had a directive. So at the end of the year, I think we're going to have an answer to what the platform economy means in the European context. And finally, collective voice. Like I said, that this was something that was really big for our research in Germany, because a lot of these platforms, the workers have organized within the last year. Some of them with repercussions, some of them have lost their jobs for organizing, for engaging in strikes, engaging in warehouse closures, etc. I was with many of the workers in many of these strikes as well. So it's very important for workers not to feel atomized and isolated, but to work together as in actual legally acknowledged structures like works councils, like or through unions. And it's our responsibility, of course, in this future economy as academics, as journalists, as activists, to keep on supporting workers to ensure that they are not dealing with the brunt of precarity, but they're actually we're all taking the necessary steps to make work a better experience for the workers.
Yeah, great points from my co-panelists. I guess all that I would say is that, well, technologies are there as tools that are supposed to make things better for us. And I guess the question we need to ask is, who is made better off by these technologies? And looking at who is made better off at a holistic sense, no? And we have to remember that platforms are technologies, but behind them are human beings. Human beings design the platforms. Human beings implement the platform economy. Human beings perform the service that makes this platform economy function, and human beings buy work from these platforms. And so we need to continually highlight the human dimension of the platform economy a bit more, so that we can work under the principle of humane labor and work under the principle of social justice rather than just profit.
Thank you so much, Bu Yohana, Bu Cheryl, and Oz for sharing such a great insights and knowledge. And there's some participants that already asking us, is there any way to reach you all after the webinar? Maybe if there's maybe if you have a email address or social media account that can be used to connect, please type it down on the chat box.
Yeah, just to add, you can also go to Fair Work websites, and we have a contact form there. I don't want to be the representative. We have two other Fair Work researchers here, and we have dozens more out there that are doing fascinating research in other country contexts. So if you have any questions, if they're directed at me directly, then I'll be more than happy to be the respondent for it. But if you have general questions about the research we do, then feel free to go to the website. It's www.fair.work, and from there you can reach to all of us, basically.
Thank you so much, Oz. Okay, once again, I want to thank our speakers for the contribution to this discussion. I will also thank all participants for your kind attention and participation. It's been a great pleasure to moderate this session. And before I wrap up the event, I would like to announce that Saska, Melissa LG, and Cheryl Maulidi, congratulations. You will receive merchandise from the Goethe-Institut, and our staff will email you later, or please check the chat box for the details. Once again, thank you so much for all of you. Thank you so much, Goethe-Institut, CfDS, EngageMedia. See you on our next digital discourse in October. I'm Amelinda, your moderator, signing off, and goodbye. Thank you so much, Bu Yohana, Bu Cheryl, and Oz. Thank you all.